started.
Of course. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have everybody here this morning. And hold on just a second, and as Laura said, thank you. Make sure to just post where you guys are from, where you all are joining us from this morning. It's always really exciting. This is such an international event that it is always just such a pleasure to get some perspective on where everybody is. Nice to see you all. California, Montreal, so exciting. See, now I'm getting distracted. Well, we're really excited this morning for the conclusion of this fall's experimental weaving talk series. And we're so glad you all are joining us either early in the morning, late at night, middle of the day, whenever you're joining us. It's such a great pleasure. Here at the Unstable Design Lab, we have a lot of amazing things coming up. And Laura is just going to give us a preview of some upcoming announcements. Well, she's going to do the announcements. So, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. And thanks again for everyone who's joining us online. And again, we're in my class this morning. And Etta, do you want to just say hi? We're doing a sort of like hybrid in-person, out-of-person event today. But as it's our last talk in this series, I just wanted to maybe wrap it up a little bit before getting into my possibly tearful intro of Etta. So this has been the first time that we've done these experimental weaving talk series talks, and it kind of came about because we host this residency and we get so many amazing applications, and then we can only pick one person, which I have to say is quite painful. So this talk series has really been a way for us to highlight a lot of the work by people who apply or people who don't apply that really is helping us think about what experimental weaving is, and maybe we can collectively define that together. So this is our last talk for this series, but we will be hosting the series again next fall. So you can look forward to that in the future. We will be hearing today from Etta Sandry, who is our current experimental weaver in residence. And before I get to the intro, just wanted to give a little bit more background. So we started the experimental weaving residency in 2019 with support from the Center for Craft. After each residency, we like to put together sort of a public-facing catalog of the work. And so in 2019, we actually made a print and PDF catalog. You can view this online. And it documents our collaboration with Sandra Wertman, who was our first experimental weaver in residence. And so the idea of the residency was really born out of our lab, the Unstable Design Lab, sort of sitting in the middle of arts and engineering and wanting to figure out how we could include textile artists and specifically weavers in more meaningful ways in engineering collaborations, and to also try to figure out what would mutual benefit even look like in those. So we were seeing a trend where a lot of times a craftsperson was brought in after the product was developed to make it look interesting or to make it look pretty, but we think craft can play a much bigger role in these narratives, and it's a form of engineering in and of itself. And so we wanted to kind of create this space to play that out in different domains. So part of that has been publishing these catalogs. And the other part of that has been actually writing academic articles for my field of practice, which is called human-computer interaction. And so what we've been doing there is trying to make arguments that craftspeople are technical collaborators. They're not somebody to be brought in at the end. They should be involved in early stages, and they should have a say in the products that are created. And so we wrote this paper describing this as a kind of research collaboration. And it's been really wonderful to hear from 2 or 3 other institutions that they've started their own residency programs, one in computer graphics, one in clay. So it's a model that I think is going to start popping up a little more, and it's really exciting to be on the forefront of that. Our first residency was supported by the Center for Craft. It's actually on view right now in a show called Material Reasoning at the Center for Craft in Asheville. Here's a photo. We're in the background, so all this, the samples we created with Sandra for this sort of head-mounted muscle sensor are shown in the back there. We were able to write a funding proposal after the Center for Craft to get 3 more years of funding for the residency from the National Science Foundation. And so this was a really big vote of confidence that it's not just something the Center for Craft is interested in. This is a model that's about US science and engineering as a whole. So we were able to get 4.
All right, Laura, just a quick reminder to have everybody post where they're joining us from this morning so that we can do that.
Okay.
All right, awesome. And are you going to introduce Elizabeth before or after Etta talks?
I have a few slides before just about
Okay.
like what the residency is, and I'll introduce Elizabeth then.
Okay, cool. I'll keep it brief. All right, let's get people in.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone. We're just getting everyone in the room quickly. Good morning or good afternoon. If you're in Colorado, I hope you're staying warm because it's very, very cold this morning. But luckily our room isn't freezing because of all the natural light. So that's great. If you have a moment in the chat to just drop in where you're joining from today, it's always interesting just to see where everyone's zooming in from. Okay, cool. Stephen, I actually can't see the chat, so I'm gonna turn it over to you. And so when you think it's good, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Of course. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have everybody here this morning. And hold on just a second. And as Laura said, thank you. Make sure to just post where you guys are from, where you all are joining us from this morning. It's always really exciting. This is such an international event that it is always just such a pleasure to get some perspective on where everybody is. Nice to see you all. California, Montreal, it's so exciting. See, now I'm getting distracted. Well, we're really excited this morning for the conclusion of this fall's experimental weaving talk series. And we're so glad you all are joining us either early in the morning, late at night, middle of the day, whenever you're joining us. It's such a great pleasure. Here at the Unstable Design Lab, we have a lot of amazing things coming up. And Laura is just going to give us a preview of some upcoming announcements. Well, she's going to do the announcements. So, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. And thanks again for everyone who's joining us online. And again, we're in my class this morning. And Etta, do you want to just say hi? We're doing a sort of like hybrid in-person, out-of-person event today. But as it's our last talk in this series, I just wanted to maybe wrap it up a little bit before getting into my possibly tearful intro of Etta. So this has been the first time that we've done these experimental weaving talk series talks, and it kind of came about because we host this residency and we get so many amazing applications, and then we can only pick one person, which I have to say is quite painful. So this talk series has really been a way for us to highlight a lot of the work by people who apply or people who don't apply that really is helping us think about what experimental weaving is, and maybe we can collectively define that together. So this is our last talk for this series, but we will be hosting the series again next fall. So you can look forward to that in the future. We will be hearing today from Etta Sandry, who is our current experimental weaver in residence. And before I get to the intro, just wanted to give a little bit more background. So we started the experimental weaving residency in 2019 with support from the Center for Craft. After each residency, we like to put together sort of a public-facing catalog of the work. And so in 2019, we actually made a print and PDF catalog. You can view this online. And it documents our collaboration with Sandra Wertenen, who was our first experimental weaver in residence. And so the idea of the residency was really born out of our lab, the Unstable Design Lab, sort of sitting in the middle of arts and engineering and wanting to figure out how we could include textile artists and specifically weavers in more meaningful ways in engineering collaborations, and to also try to figure out what would mutual benefit even look like in those. So we were seeing a trend where a lot of times a craftsperson was brought in after the product was developed to make it look interesting or to make it look pretty, but we think craft can play a much bigger role in these narratives, and it's a form of engineering in and of itself. And so we wanted to kind of create this space to play that out in different domains. So part of that has been publishing these catalogs, and the other part of that has been actually writing academic articles for my field of practice, which is called human-computer interaction. And so what we've been doing there is trying to make arguments that craftspeople are technical collaborators. They're not somebody to be brought in at the end. They should be involved in early stages, and they should have a say in the products that are created. And so we wrote this paper describing this as a kind of research collaboration. And it's been really wonderful to hear from 2 or 3 other institutions that they've started their own residency programs, one in computer graphics, one in clay. So it's a model that I think is going to start popping up a little more, and it's really exciting to be on the forefront of that. Our first residency was supported by the Center for Craft. It's actually on view right now in a show called Material Reasoning at the Center for Craft in Asheville. Here's a photo. We're in the background, so all this, the samples we created with Sandra for this sort of head-mounted muscle sensor are shown in the back there. So we were able to write a funding proposal after the Center for Craft to get 3 more years of funding for the residency from the National Science Foundation. And so this was a really big vote of confidence that it's not just something the Center for Craft is interested in. This is a model that's about US science and engineering as a whole. So we were able to get 3 more years of funding. Our first year of that funding is supporting Etta. Our next year, we're happy to announce we'll support Elizabeth Michaeljohn. And then we'll have 1 more call this year for the final residency in the series. So this is the point where we've made the announcement on Instagram, but I wanted to make a public announcement to this group to welcome Elizabeth, who will be our next Weaver in Residence starting in the spring. So I think Elizabeth's in the call. Maybe you just want to unmute and say hello really quick.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for introducing me. I'm so excited to join the lab and work with everyone there and just to really experiment with structure and materials. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it too and excited to see it keep going. So thank you. What we're also going to be starting next year in the fall is we've invited Catherine Walters to join us, who you might recall gave one of the talks earlier, as kind of maybe a spin-off program to the residency that's really focused on weavers who are already in academic institutions who might want to come do some visiting work. So we're really excited to host Catherine this fall as well. Okay. Before I get on to our introduction, and I'm sorry, this has been a bit of a long start, I just wanted to thank all the people who've been involved in the residency. Stephen, who's here on the call, Allison Anderson, who's another faculty member at CU, who's been a huge collaborator, and all the members of the Unstable Design Lab, some of which are in the audience and some of which are online, as I see, but also our selection committee. Which has been really great because every year we get the selection committee together to try to brainstorm other ways to make this a beneficial program. And so a lot of the ideas you're hearing and the genesis of the talk series isn't necessarily my own or Stephen's own. It comes from this group conversation. So it's really been an honor to have other voices with us in this process. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Let's go ahead and welcome Etta. So Etta Sandry is our current experimental weaver in residence. I don't even know where to start, and I should have written something down, but then I couldn't write something down because Etta's become maybe more of a friend and a collaborator through this process, and I'm maybe more sad than I know to see this kind of coming to an ending point. So we chose Etta as our experimental weaver in residence because her practice really exemplifies the beauty of structure and really kind of digs into process in a way that we found really inspiring. And so more than just seeing some amazing weaves, what I really loved about Etta's work was this commitment to sampling and sort of following the materials and seeing where they go. We've had the pleasure to work really closely this semester, actually this whole year in some ways, to kind of develop these things. And it's just been so great to work with her side by side. And I really appreciate her openness and the conversations that we've had, because there's a really interesting brain with the really talented hands. And so I'm really excited for you to show more of your stuff and to welcome you and let you do the talk. Oh God. But, yeah, thank you so much. We'll let you come over and I'll switch the screen. Okay, I'm gonna stop that share. Now I have to do, we're gonna do some fancy, okay, I'm gonna go to your slides and then I'm gonna like, boop, 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 pretend you didn't see any of that before. Okay, how's this looking, Stephen? Are we good? Okay.
Yes, it looks awesome, Laura.
Okay, thank you, just making sure. So I'm going to turn it over to Etta. Just you can position yourself in the screen there, and then I'll turn it off, and I'll just hang out next to you in case you need a little extra thing. All right.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Etta Sandry. I, as Laura said, have been the experimental weaver in residence this year, 2022. I'm an artist, weaver, educator, and facilitator. For the last 5 years, I've been living in Montreal, but for the last few months, I've been here in Boulder, working in the Unstable Design Lab. Thank you to the class for having me. I'm really glad to be able to do this in person. I'm feeling a little nervous, so I'm gonna pretend like you're my only audience today. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about experimental weaving, the theme of the residency in this talk series, and kind of offer some thoughts around what is experimental weaving, and also share some images, notes, samples that have emerged from the residency this past year. Do I have to click? Okay.
There you go.
So to start out, I want to begin with a few acknowledgements and gratitudes. First, for the land. It's been an immense privilege to be a guest in this city that we call Boulder, Colorado, and which is the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of the Ananahe, Arapaho, Tsitsets, Cheyenne, and Nuchu-Ute people, as well as other indigenous peoples who have traversed and stewarded this land from time immemorial. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a visitor amongst the incredible mountains, rivers, lakes, plains, flora, and fauna that share this land. And then huge thank you to Laura and Stephen and the Unstable Design Lab. This lab is just a really special place of curiosity, collaboration, and support. Thank you to all the students and other members of the lab for welcoming me into this space and showing curiosity about my work and being open to conversation around a lot of different topics and also friendship. And thank you to Stephen and Laura for their generosity, collaboration, feedback, friendship, and support throughout this entire year. I want to acknowledge Laura, who makes this residency possible and really facilitates this incredible space that does foster collaboration and support amongst its participants. There's some other things, but I just can't have to skip them. But just to say, Laura has been beyond flexible this year, making it possible for me to be here, and it's just been a really fantastic collaboration. So thank you. And thank you to all the other weavers who have participated in this talk series. It's been really inspiring to hear you speak about your work. And I think this is something I'm going to talk about is discourse. And I think that this is a really exciting discourse around experimental weaving, where we're kind of defining it, but really we're just entering into ongoing conversation, I think. And then my last acknowledgement is to my mom. Today is her birthday. And so I just want to shout out happy birthday to my mom. I think she's on the call. So yeah, she said she would be. Yeah, I'm grateful for her. All right, so the topic of the day is what is experimental weaving? And what happened during this residency. So I'm in this like last couple of weeks of wrap up of this residency and maybe feeling a little bit chaotic, which might come through in the format of this presentation. But I'm just, going to talk through some ideas about this idea of experimental weaving. My goals coming into the residency were to produce a lot of smaller scale experimental samples, tests, models, and drafts that could serve as tools for future research for myself as well as others across various fields. And I was particularly interested in shape-changing cloth structures and materials that create collapsibility, compression, and dimensionality in the woven cloth. All right, so when I'm trying to think through a concept or enter into an area of research and try to articulate it, I like to kind of ground in language, and language is something that Laura and I have been talking about and working with a lot this year in working on a glossary for Laura's software AdaCAD, writing the introduction to woven structure for HCI paper that we worked on, and really trying to define, but more articulate weaving terms for both weaving and non-weaving audiences. I realized in putting this talk last night, after I put this talk together, that I don't at all try to define or really talk about weaving itself in this talk. And I think that something that has emerged is this sort of impossibility of definition or clear articulation, where everyone has different terms and different backgrounds and different histories when they're coming to weaving. And it's more about, articulation and discourse and talking things through. So I looked up some definitions focusing on experiment and what does it mean to experiment. And there are a couple that I really liked that I wanted to foreground the presentation in, and I'll return to them throughout. So this first definition of experiment as the action of trying anything or putting it to proof, a test, a trial. And I really like that piece, trying anything. That highlight is mine. And I'll kind of talk about how that comes up in my thoughts around experimental weaving throughout the talk. And then also a tentative procedure, a method, system, a course of action adopted in uncertainty. So I also really liked that piece of uncertainty, not knowing and risk-taking, and I think that's really central in how I think about sampling and experimental weaving. So I'll go on. So I looked up the definition, I made a word association list, and then tried to make this mind map. And like I said, I'm in this sort of oh no, it's really blown out. Sorry.
But it looks all right on the screen.
Oh yeah, maybe a little clearer over there. But anyway, well, I'll go on to the next slide. But just to say, the thoughts are all kind of entangled and everything seemed like it was connecting to each other, which is how I find mind maps tend to be, where I'm I wish this could be more of a cloud than a map and take form in space. But there were a few key ideas or terms related to experimental weaving that I thought were, the ones that I wanted to focus on in this talk, and the ones that I think were most present for me during the residency. And those are making, method, play, inquiry, failure, discourse, collaboration, and these all for me connect around the idea and practice of sampling. This is what this is how I'm structuring the talk, and this is what I'll speak to as we go. And hopefully at the end there will be time to look at, I brought a bag of samples, so hopefully there will be some time to look at those through our camera at the end. But first I want to talk about this idea of making, which I think experimental weaving is really rooted in making and in material and process-based work. For me, it involves a deep material engagement with material properties, potentials, and histories, and an engagement with craft tools and technologies. So for me, I work in fiber-based practices, but we can think of material in a pretty expansive way. So material can be digital, it can be thread-based, it can be language. Do I do that?
Stephen can do that.
Okay. Yeah, so rooting experimental weaving in making. So to exemplify that, I'll do a quick run through of what was made during this residency, what happened.
If I pass out the samples to the class?
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah. So this fall, I've been working a lot with the TC2 Jacquard loom that's in the lab. And I've also been using a software, an open source weave drafting software called AdaCAD that Laura has created and is constantly developing and updating to design my files for the Jacquard loom. To be honest, I sometimes find the Jacquard to be a little bit intimidating, and though it has infinite possibilities, it also has some limitations. So when I first arrived at the residency, I was working on an 8-shaft floor loom and was making a series of waffle weave samples with a wool warp and a variety of weft materials. I've also been exploring overtwist mostly in weft materials, but trying to understand the twist in thread and how it could be used in different kinds of woven structure for different results. Also felting and other kinds of processing of the cloth off the loom. Working with pleats, trying to work pleats into the cloth through twill and satin stripes. In the sample on the right, I was working with wool, polyester, cotton, linen, a metallic steel weft, thermoplastic, and elastic in the weft to see how the fabric pleated in different ways with these different materials. I've also been working with cord weave structures, again, to try to create pleats or other forms of dimensionality in the cloth. And then also playing around with some stretchy structures and materials. These samples are of waffle and crepe structures and integrated some state-changing wefts that Laura had ordered for the lab. So just trying to play and have fun with these. So these are all examples of sampling, which, as Laura kind of introduced, is really a core aspect of my practice and has become an area of research for me. I think all of the aspects of experimental weaving that I introduced at the beginning, making, method, play, failure, inquiry, discourse, and collaboration, all connect to the practice and idea of sampling, which has long been a part of my own practice as an artist, craftsperson, student, and educator, but really emerged for me as a method, a research method, an area of focus, of deeper focus, and through the completion of my MFA thesis work in 2021, which was coming together at a time in the midst of the pandemic where I was like, what conclusion is there? There is no conclusion. I think sampling as a method is what is appropriate right now and has now become a core focus of my research. So really working with the material and accumulation. Oops. So what is sampling? To sample is to test, to trial, to experiment, to research, to make. A sample is an example, and it's a process of learning and demonstrating through making. I believe that sampling employs a knowledge that is material, haptic, and tacit, and it's a process of thinking, failing, and transforming. So in my work, I make a lot of woven samples. I've also worked in ceramics, making samples of different kinds of clay bodies and glazes. So this is sampling and testing are essential practices in textiles and other craft fields. As ways of learning techniques, understanding material interactions, and demonstrating the results. And textile samples have been used throughout time to teach these techniques to practitioners and as examples for future work. And I believe this history demonstrates not just a learning practice, but also a broader global exchange of ideas. As small work samples have low stakes, and can become emergent platforms for experimentation and risk-taking in material. Oops. So sampling is typically engaged as a practice, as I've said, to learn new techniques or as a way of modeling for a final product, but as a cumulative process of research, material probing, and play. I believe that sampling can be the work itself, and this is what my research has been focused on over the last couple of years and my practice. For me, this is also connected to teaching and pedagogy. I believe that sampling is a way of, rather than thinking about a right or correct way to do something or working towards a distinct outcome or end product. It's more of a mode of testing, experimenting, and active learning that I think of as a pathway without a defined destination. So you may not know where you end up at the end. And this connects back to the definition of experiment that I set forward at the beginning, where it's a tentative procedure adopted in uncertainty. So to me, that's really what sampling is this kind of exploratory practice that we don't know where it's going to go. And I think that this is really important because I think we live in a really outcome-driven economy and education system, culture, where creativity, exploration, and intentionality can sometimes be kind of stultified when we're really focused on the end product or trying to create like a novel outcome, or if we're afraid of failing or getting something wrong. And experimentation and sampling prompts us to slow down, explore, contemplate, and then kind of move forward in our work with thoughtfulness and criticality. So I've talked about sampling as a method, and this is my next kind of aspect of experimental weaving that I want to talk about. So method was in that first definition of experiment that I showed at the beginning. An experiment is a method, a system of things, or a course of action. A method is a systematic procedure, a technique, and a mode of inquiry, or a process of doing something. So for me, sampling is a method. That is the process and systematic procedure that I use in my work. And experimentation is also a method within weaving as we're trying to kind of explore what is experimental weaving. So I'm fairly methodical and systematic in my making and sampling process. I have a deep curiosity about woven structure and material. So for me, these systems or these methods come forward through researching woven structure, trying to understand how a woven structure works, drafting out the structure, creating paper models and weavings, and then actually weaving the structure and working with a variety of materials or pattern pattern possibilities to see what emerges. So this is what we're seeing on the slide, some notes about waffle weave, a paper weaving of the waffle weave structure, and then a series of woven waffle samples with a variety of weft materials. Yeah, so my process usually follows some research, reading, looking at other weave drafting books or other craft theory, drafting out the structure for myself to understand how it works, doing the weaving, and then this is a sort of like not cyclical, but maybe like a wave-like process or something, or maybe like a loop, where then once the sample is woven, I reflect on the sample, take notes, see what emerged in that process, and then that prompts me forward to my next samples. So on the screen, we're seeing drafts of cord weave structures, the samples of the cords, and then my notes about the sample and what I might want to do in my next iteration of this work. So for me, this is a process of asking questions and then reflecting. In this slide, I have some drafts of some potentially stretchy woven structures that I wove on the jacquard. And then as I wove them, I was like, oh, I want these to be a little bit bigger. I think the floats should go here, and was adding those notes back onto my drafts. And then at the top, we see a screenshot of the bitmap file that I designed in AutoCAD for the next sample that was woven. So I think that this methodical process is important to understand the material interactions and results. Why did something happen this way here with this material? Why did it happen this way over here? And how can we reproduce results or adjust the material for a desired outcome and to deepen our understanding of material and structure? So all of that being said about the importance of method, I also think that play is really essential in experimental weaving and sampling. My practice is methodical as well as playful. I enjoy gaining deep technical knowledge, but I'm also excited to be an amateur and often move between projects and mediums within my experimental practice. So I'm often sampling and then translating or transforming material to see what emerges through this play process. Oh no, my voice. It's okay, I muted it.
We made a machine.
We made a machine. Yeah, so
Just a little servo.
Yeah, so this is an example of some play that emerged within this residency. So for me, I'm playing with materials and tools by testing their limits, as well as responding to and asking questions of them to draw out their possibilities. So again, this is really rooted in this idea of like making and deep material engagement. For me, this comes out in form and pattern, material and color, the speculative possibilities, and then the like off-loom human material interaction. So these videos are examples of like, all right, so I wove this thing, but like, how can it continue to have life and movement off the loom? Yeah, so let's see. So play is really core in my practice and how I think about sampling, but to be honest, I sometimes need to be encouraged to play a little bit more. As I demonstrated, I do have this very methodical and systematic way of approaching sampling, and I think that's important, but there's definitely been times throughout this residency when I've been feeling a little bit stuck or not knowing how to proceed with a sample, and Laura's been like, why don't you just just like weave something without a plan. And I think that's really important, and again connects back to this idea of trying anything that was a part of the definition of experiment, that sometimes you just need to kind of like try it out and see what's going to happen. And the more that we engage with material in this playful way, I think the more discoveries we can have. I think this method of play encourages pushing limits and boundaries. The loom as this sort of like rigid binary grid can seem very limited. I know that we've all learned that that's not true, but we need that play practice to create the emergence, dimensionality, and transformation that can come in woven cloth. Yeah. And this is an image of a sort of like playful collaboration that Laura and I did one day, where she knitted some I-cord and then I wove it into these cord weave structures on the jacquard to see if we could create some pleated structure. And it was not really successful. No. But that brings me to the next aspect of experimental weaving that I think is important to talk about, which is failure. Sometimes a failure in your tools, as we can see down here with our broken threads or tension issues. And sometimes just in getting an outcome that you're not super thrilled about, or like didn't turn out the way that you expected it to. But I think that failure and disruption are essential ways to discover the material limits and to prompt new questions that we don't maybe know to ask going into a project or a sample. As a method, sampling is full of potential for failure and mess and sloppy stitches and broken threads and outcomes that we don't really like. So I think there's an important aspect of uncertainty and vulnerability in sampling and experimentation as practices. That we have to kind of like risk this failure, or risk getting an outcome that we don't like, or maybe risk like wasting time or wasting material. Those are things that always feel like really precious to me in order to get an unanticipated discovery. I also think it's important for systems to fail sometimes so that we can understand how they come together and perhaps reconfigure them. And I think in like a broader sense, we're seeing this happen in our world right now, systems failing, and it allows opportunity for us to consider like, how could these be different? What other outcomes do we want to see? In his book, The Craftsman, Richard Sennett has this nice note about failure and mess that I really like. And he writes that to arrive at the goal, the work process has to do something distasteful to the tidy mind, which is to dwell temporarily in mess, in wrong moves, false starts, and dead ends. The probing craftsman does more than encounter mess. They create it as a means of understanding working procedures. So we experiment and sample as ways to learn and practice techniques, but also as a practice in practicing, an aspect of which is failing. And this is a way of learning in not getting it right at first, in trying and failing and maybe feeling frustrated, and then moving forward with new knowledge. So yeah, so I'll leave it there. I think this practice of trial and error and failure and reflection is a practice of inquiry. So the aspects of experimental weaving that I've described, I think, are all practices of inquiry and discourse, asking questions of the materials and tools that we're working with, as well as their contexts and histories, and then entering into broader inquiry and discourse with each other within fields and communities. So my approach to experimentation is inquiry-based and driven by a curiosity about the materials, as I've demonstrated in previous slides, how the materials come together, how they work, and how they might work differently. And from this close look at material, I develop speculative questions to expand upon through more theory-based research and writing. And then, as I said, this is sort of like a looping process for me where the questions that I'm asking and reflecting on return to the material, and that's kind of my mode of, or a mode of trying to answer those questions. For me, this also comes up in my practice through written reflection. So a lot of the notes that I've been showing on the screen are from my notebooks and sketchbooks. I keep a list of questions that I've noted down through studio visits and critiques and lectures and things like that, and use them as writing prompts to enter into my studio space and help to articulate my ideas within my work. As I've again reiterated, I'm very material based, but sometimes need that reflection space to be able to talk about it, which hopefully I'm doing an okay job of right now. Yeah, so I think that inquiry is a process of learning, knowledge building, and sharing, and it's a discourse built with materials and also within an exchange of knowledge. Okay, so inquiry, I think, is closely related to this other aspect of experimental weaving, discourse. And as I've just said, this is a discourse both between us and the materials, but also amongst ourselves and broader communities. So throughout the residency, I've been engaging in this discourse with Laura and other lab members, and with the experimental weaving community. As I said at the beginning of this talk, this is an aspect of that kind of ongoing discourse about what is experimental weaving. Yeah, so in working with Laura, we've talked a lot about language. We've been collaborating on her software AdaCAD, and thinking about discourse as where do these terms come from? What is the importance of having a shared terminology and shared language? And reflecting on AdaCAD as a tool, who it serves, who is this for? How can someone access it who maybe doesn't have a weaving background, and how can it be a useful tool for someone who does have an extensive weaving background? And then this is all coming out of this huge historical discourse and history of weaving as a practice, that we've all, I think, gained in different ways, whether it's in a classroom setting, through weaving books, through weaving guilds or publications. Yeah, so it all kind of I don't know what to say. I guess it's ongoing, there's no conclusion, but it's just exciting to be a part of this discourse. And another aspect of engaging in this is inviting in new audiences. So we worked on this paper introducing weave structure for the HCI community that really emerged from these kinds of conversations around language and what is necessary to understand about weaving if someone wants to approach weaving as for applications in e-textiles or in other HCI pursuits. And we ended up creating this paper that was both an introduction to force sensors as well as a how-to manual that introduces the basics of woven structure and terminology. So yeah, so just kind of building on these conversations that we're having individually, but also that build on these histories and broader discourses around weaving. So yeah, an important aspect of discourse as sharing ideas and findings, and then participating in community and building community. And that brings me to my last aspect of experimental weaving that I want to talk about, which is collaboration. So collaboration is one of the goals of the experimental weaving residency. And I think when I first arrived, I wasn't sure what collaborations would emerge for me. And also took a moment to reflect on what does collaboration even mean and what is my approach to collaboration. So for me, it's a mutual excitement and curiosity about a similar project goal or question, involving multiple participants, bringing together different practices and skills to the work. And I think the best collaborations that I've been involved with have always kind of just happened on their own without forcing them or staging them, and just emerged through conversation and shared curiosity and interest. So the collaborations that I've found coming out of this residency are, I mean, Laura's already talked to how we've been working quite closely together. We've been working on AdaCAD. We'll sometimes on Fridays just kind of like play in the studio together, and that's created some interesting weaving machines and other kinds of like fun little projects, as well as I think that like paper also kind of came out of some of our conversations through these just like informal play spaces. And then there's also been collaborations and conversations with other lab members. And then again, this connection to the broader weaving community through this talk series, through studio visits and phone calls, through social media engagement, things like that. So I'm really grateful for all of those collaborations, and I hope that they continue on and that more emerge as this community grows. So then the last thing in this vein of collaboration that I want to share from this residency is a collaborative space that I've been facilitating and participating in throughout the fall, which is Sampling Club. Sampling Club invited Atlas members from all fields and practices to engage with sampling as a method of researching, making, and knowing. And was trying to ask how the idea of swatching and sampling might apply across fields, and what this method might offer to different types of research practices. So we've been meeting weekly in the lab. There's, sorry, LT. In the lab, there's been usually 3 to 7 participants, depending on our schedules and the pressures of classes and semester and everything. And yeah, I invited everyone to think of a research question at the start of the club, so earlier on this fall, that they might be able to answer through material. And each week, we did some free write exercises reflecting on the samples that they'd been working on that week, and it became this really nice informal space to share and discuss work in progress outside of a classroom setting, and also talk about research, what is research, to ask questions across fields and receive feedback. So it's been a really exciting and nice space to participate in, and thank you to everyone who participated and came to Sampling Club. It's been really exciting to see the different kinds of samples that have emerged through the club, and to hear the kind of connection, resource sharing, and exchange that can happen across fields and areas of interest. Our conversations ranged in topic from like the body and movement, to glitch, to questioning what a queer weaving might be. So it was really, yeah, just like generative and exciting, and really like also a like sweet and special meeting space. So yeah, and we'll be showcasing our samples in the Unstable Design Lab next Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4. We're gonna like tidy up and like make everything look nice. So if you wanna come see what the Sampling Club has been individually and collectively working on this semester, please stop by. Maybe we'll have snacks.
And also, you're welcome to show your samples too.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's where I'm going to end.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm gonna do like some zoomy stuff. And also like there's this like, and you come in the frame, I come in the frame, and then anyway. Well, thank you so much, Etta. And this is of course the time when we can take questions from the group, and I'll let Stephen moderate those. You're welcome to just drop them in the chat. As we mentioned, if anyone's curious to see some of the physical products of the sampling, we have set up this little document camera, and we have some of the samples here. So if there is anything you saw in the slides that you want to see closer, ask questions about, feel free to do so.
Hey, Laura, I think everybody wants to see that waffle weave again, if Etta has it there.
Which one?
The one with the paracord in it. That's just the one my favorite.
Oh, the paracord one. Okay. Cool.
It's
There's
my
a lot of waffles. I also discovered in Boulder downtown, there's a restaurant called the Waffle Lab, which I feel like, might be appropriate. So let me change the camera, and then I will spotlight, and let's do some autofocus. There we go. That is...
Oh, that's so nice. I love it.
Yeah, that one's pretty fun.
It's just such a cool object. I just like,
What's that? So that's a good question. So we have a question from the class about what determines how the depth of the waffle.
Oh God.
I had to show it somehow.
So I think that's partly determined by the size of the cell. So with these samples, I had a pretty wide set. I think this was like 6 or 8 ends per inch on the loom. So even in the non-paracord samples, we see these cells are like quite wide. And then I think because the paracord isn't very elastic, it ends up really like packing in and stacking on itself, instead of like maybe spacing or stretching out a little bit more like the wool wefts. And so it creates this like if it's not being handled, it kind of just like squishes together. But then when we pull it apart, we see the depth in that cell. I don't know, does that articulate the question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this one too with the over twist. So it's like, it's resting, it stretches. Anyway, just kind of some fun over twist tests.
I love these so much. And we do have a question, Etta. Stacy, who has been an amazing guest to all of our lectures this semester. So great to see you here, Stacy. And thank you for your email earlier this week. They were asking about outcomes. And I know that's kind of the antithesis of what you're saying, like being in this space of play, being in the space of samples. For people that aren't necessarily familiar with your work, Etta, I know you've done some installations before. Stacy's just really wondering where you think these pieces, will they go? Are you expecting them to go into installations, wearables, industry, or like whatever? I don't know I know that's a stressful question, but I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I don't know yet. Like I said, when I came into the residency, I was really focused on sampling, but with the potential that there may be some discoveries that could move forward in research, maybe not necessarily my work or research, but maybe contribute to other people's work, design, and research. For me, I guess, as I've been developing this practice around sampling, I've been displaying the work in these kind of like cumulative installations. So I didn't really show any of my past work, but I've been setting up like display structures and environments where all of the samples can kind of like come together. And I think, yeah, so that's potential. We've also been working on like a website or catalog. So other non-material ways of bringing the research and writing and thoughts together.
That's so exciting, Etta. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate all the energy and that you've brought to the lab. It's been such a great example of Laura's philosophy of like artists coming into designer spaces. It's been really fun to see the kind of work that has come out of from you and from our students as well. It's just such a great space to be, and I'm excited to see all the publications and the secondary work. Any other questions from folks in the audience or folks in the classroom?
If you have a question here, feel free to raise your hand. If you have one on Zoom, feel free to drop it in the comments. Or chat, that's what it's called.
The chat,
Not
that's
comments.
right.
It's very
Comment section, that's so terrifying.
Yeah. Joshua. All right, so the question is about what, there's an affinity to the waffle. What about the waffle is drawing you to it?
Yeah, so for some time in my work, I've been really interested in the possibility of dimensionality within cloth, because weaving is a binary system and is drafted as a flat grid. I think there's a really important and exciting transformation and emergence between the draft and the cloth. And in past work, I've explored this through multi-layer weaving, because like all other woven structure, it's drafted in this flat grid, but then has these like layers and folds and pockets when you take it off the loom. But having worked a lot with multi-layer weaving, I've been interested in exploring other structures that also produce dimensionality in the cloth, which we may often think of as a flat plane if we're maybe not looking very closely at it or don't have if we don't have like a deep weaving knowledge. And waffle weave just like does that so nicely, especially when we can like blow it up to this larger scale. Yeah. And it also does these like this, like it has this collapsing or like movement potential with it as well, depending on the material that's used.
Thank you, Etta. I love I'm so excited by waffle weaves too. So it was so nice to see you would do all that work. Nikita has a great question for you. Since you're weaving a lot on the TC2 loom, how do you plan different experiments thinking of the same work? Do you think that was a restriction, or was there still a lot of space to explore? So just in case everybody knows, we have a TC2 loom in our lab that we warp like every 6 months. And then we have sort of, that is the warp color. And it just happens to be natural color this 6 months that Etta is here. It's been black in the past, so that does create something. I don't know, Etta, how do you feel about our warp color and the TC2 limitations or not limitations?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Thank you, Nikita. I mean, it's been such a treat to be able to work on the jacquard. So I've been trying to get a lot of jacquard time in during the residency, because it's a tool that we as weavers don't often have access to unless we're in an institutional setting. So it's been exciting to work on it. But like looking at my wall of samples in the lab, I'm like, oh, they're all kind of like white. As much as I try to like work in different weft materials and things like that, they do have this very like consistent palette through the warp, which isn't like thrilling, but has been a way to sample a ton of different structural possibilities in a short span of time, and also creates a challenge for thinking through like different weft systems. And if I want to, like, okay, so it has this, the limitations of the loom are the warp color. Also, the set of the warp right now is quite dense on our jacquard. So if I want to like make the structures bigger or like push the structures further, like what do I need to adjust in my drafting to allow for that? And like what material combinations can I throw